Good evening everyone. Welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu News Analysis. So today is 5th May 2025 and today we have some very important topics for the discussion, and these topics are very important for both prelims and mains exam, and one by one we'll discuss all these important articles in a very detailed and in-depth manner. And the first topic with which we are going to start this discussion is about the 16th Finance Commission. And this article has been given in the Indian Express newspaper, and this is very important for your general studies paper too, right? Because it primarily dealing with the devolution of finances from the center to states, and it is about the 16th Finance Commission. Now in this particular article we'll understand the composition of the Finance Commission, its constitutional status, its powers, functions, and what are the existing problems that the Finance Commission must look into, and what are the problems in the fiscal federalism and that makes the states dissatisfied about the devolution of finances from the center to states. So the context, what is the exact context of this particular article? The context is that in recent times several states in their submissions to the 16th Finance Commission, because 16th Finance Commission also takes into account the considerations of different states. So as part of this, different states have provided submissions to the 16th Finance Commission, and they are also started demanding increased share in the divisible tax pool. So as of now, 41% of the total taxes are distributed to the states, right? The overall objective of constituting a finance commission once in a 5 years by the president is to recommend the devolution of finances or distribution of finances between the center and states. And as of now, the earlier finance commission, the 15th Finance Commission, has recommended 41% devolution from the center to states. However, to the 16th Finance Commission, most of the states have been asking for or demanding for an increased share in the divisible tax pool more than 41%. So they have been demanding more than 41% of the divisible pool of taxes, because they are showing that there is a reduced actual transfers due to rising cess and surcharge. Now cess and surcharge are not part of the divisible pool of taxes, right? For example, imagine that if center's total revenue is 100 crore, right? So just imagine that center's total revenue is 100 crore, and out of 100 crore, 20 crore is a cess and surcharge. So this 20 crore will not come as part of the divisible pool of total taxes, right? So the cess and surcharges are only with the central government alone, and they are not part of the divisible pool, and they will not be distributed with the respective states. However, the trend in recent times is that the cess and surcharges have been increasing for the central government, and that makes the total devolution of taxes to the states has been diminishing over a period of time. However, this particular demand from the state governments has actually raised important questions, right? So these questions are revolving around the issue of fiscal federalism. Now, what exactly is a fiscal federalism? So this is a form of federalism that mainly deals with the devolution of finances from the center to states, right? So it actually raised some critical and most important questions with respect to fiscal federalism, equitable distribution of resources, and even the efficient public service delivery on the part of the states as well. And the other thing that we should understand, if we take into account the overall expenditure or spending of both central and state government, in fact state governments alone spending 60% of the total expenditure across the country. So keeping this in mind, the states have been demanding that they should be given more and more revenues above the 41% that was already recommended by the 15th Finance Commission. right? So this is what their submissions are actually. Now in this context, we have to understand the center state fiscal dynamics. So it is very important to understand. So as I have already told you that the divisible pool of taxes 41% has been given to the states, right? So 41% is the divisible pool of taxes. 41% has been recommended by the 15th Finance Commission to the different states. However, states have been claiming that they have been receiving only 32% of the total divisible pool of taxes, because in recent times the cess and surcharges have been increasing manifold. However, the cess and surcharge are non-divisible, right? So they will not be distributed to the respective state government, but center in recent times has been increasing the cess and surcharge. And in fact, the author has also provided us a data indicating that there is a substantial rise in the cess and surcharge on the part of the central government. For example, so 11.4% cess and surcharge out of the total income, total revenue in 2011-12, and it has doubled to 21.1% by 2021-22. So since the cess and surcharge don't part of the divisible pool, and at the same time the center would retain the cess and surcharge, the states have been arguing that the total divisible pool of taxes which are recommended by the 15th Finance Commission, that is 41%, is in actual terms it is just a 32%, and it is mainly because of cess and surcharge, right? So a few things that we should understand here. So what is cess and surcharge, right? So cess and surcharge, so we'll try to understand this. So cess is actually a tax, a particular tax which is imposed for a cause, right? For example, it could be healthcare, it could be education, right? A particular cause, a tax will be imposed on certain goods, and most probably these goods are sin goods. For example, either it could be luxury items, it could be tobacco, it could be alcohol. So in those items, the cess is actually imposed by the central government, and central government collect cess and keep the cess with itself. And apart from that, what is a surcharge? So we need to understand the surcharge as well. So surcharge is a tax on tax, right? So this is a tax on tax. So for example, your total taxable income is, for example, if I can say, if you are earning 100 crore, if you are earning 100 crore and you need to pay around 30 crore as a tax, and on this 30 crore, 2 crore will be charged as a surcharge, right? So it is actually a charge on charge, and that is the difference between cess and surcharge. So however, in recent times, what has been happening is that center's obligations have been increasing, particularly the financial obligations of the center has been increasing, and the center is also borrowing to fund transfers. So transfers in the sense that center must transfer 41% of the total revenues to the respective state governments. So in order to fund these transfers, center has been borrowing, and in fact thereby increasing overall transfers without any expenditure rationalization. Now it is very important on the part of the states, they must do the expenditure rationalization. So expenditure rationalization in the sense that, for example, imagine that a central government has allocated a certain sum of money to different states. Now what states have been doing, instead of investing that money in productive sectors, so they are started announcing freebies to mobilize the voters. So that's where there is a lack of expenditure rationalization. So if we make the expenditure rationalization, that will help achieve the fiscal prudence, and that would also help the states spending the existing fiscal resources in a much more efficient and effective manner, and that is what the author has been telling us. And in fact, there is also a need for the transfer composition reforms. So transfer composition reforms essentially means that center transfer a certain sum of money to the respective state governments, and in this context, when the central government has been transferring funds to the respective state governments, so center has been giving this money as a tied fund and untied funds, right? So when I say tied funds, so there are certain schemes that the center may launch. For example, it could be Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, it could be power sector reforms, right? So if a state performing well, then those funds will be given as incentives, right? So those are known as either tied funds or tied grants, right? So there are some other different type of a funding. So it is untied funding. Now what does untied funding? So untied funding is a funding which is having no relation with the implementation or performance of any of the schemes. As an obligation, central government directly provides a certain sum of money to the respective state governments. Now in this context, it is very, very important that the central government must bring the reforms, the transfer composition reforms as well. And here you could see some information about the 16th Finance Commission. So 16th Finance Commission was constituted in 2023. And also remember that Finance Commission is a constitutional body, and that was created through Article 281 of the Indian Constitution, and you should remember this, right? So in fact, it is a constitutionally mandated body because Article 280 mandates the constitution of the Finance Commission once in every 5 years by the President. And in fact, this ensures fiscal federalism. The Finance Commission plays a very, very important role in ensuring fiscal federalism by recommending the divisible taxes between the center and the states as well. However, the Finance Commission's core responsibility or the central responsibility is to evaluate a state's finances of the union and state governments and also recommend sharing taxes between them. And the first Finance Commission was constituted in 1951 after India's independence. Now this time for the 16th Finance Commission, Dr. Arvind Pangaria, so he was the former vice chairman of the Niti Aayog, and he is now the chairman of the 16th Finance Commission. So you just have to remember this. Now, as I have already explained to you, there are certain sum of funds which are considered as tied funds and also the untied funds as well. Now in this context, there are certain challenges which are existing with respect to the untied funds and their utilization. And when we talk about the untied transfers or funds, there is a rising trend of revenue deficits in most of the states, because you could see the rising revenue deficits in states like Karnataka, in Punjab, and this is a key concern, right? So what is a revenue deficit? So revenue deficit is the difference between the total revenue expenditure minus total revenue receipts. In most of the states, revenue deficits have been increasing manifold. Now why revenue deficits have been increasing in all these states? So despite the center has been providing funding to the most of the states, why states have been experiencing revenue deficit? Because the funding is not spent on the productive sectors. They are not investing this particular amount of money on the productive sectors. So instead of that, they are spending this money on the unproductive sectors. So unproductive sectors, particularly we can talk about the subsidies, right? So since they are spending this money on subsidies, it is considered as an unproductive sector, and state governments may not be able to earn adequate amount of revenues also if they spend the money on the unproductive sectors, right? So because of this reason, there is a substantial rise in the revenue deficits in most of the states, and this is the first concern. And in fact, 14 states now, they are implementing the quasi universal income support. Now what does this quasi universal income support scheme? So this income support scheme is very close to the universal basic income, and this was the concept. It was very often in news 2-3 years back. And in fact, the direct income support extended by the governments to the families or different population groups is considered as a quasi universal income support. So instead of providing subsidies, concessions, the governments directly transfer a certain sum of money into the beneficiaries' bank accounts, and this is what is considered as a quasi universal income support. So according to an estimate, the universal income support that the states have been providing is around 0.6% of total India's GDP, right? So we don't know whether this money is being used for the productive or for the development, or it is being spent on a wasteful expenditure, right? So we don't have any substantial data, since most of the states, what they have been doing, they have been transferring money into the bank accounts of the individuals. However, most of this is funded through expenditure switching or borrowing, and therefore it raises the sustainability concerns as well in the longer term, right? So apart from that, when center has been transferring a certain sum of money to these respective states, it is very important that they need to spend it in a prudent manner, and there should be some accountability mechanisms also. These accountability mechanisms ensures that the state governments have been spending this money in a wise manner, in a fiscally prudent manner, rather than spending this money on unproductive sectors. For example, state governments have been giving free power, they have been giving free water, and they have been announcing number of subsidies, and because of all these reasons, of course, there will be always a challenge to the fiscal health of our states, right? So therefore, without having any accountability mechanisms, more untied funds may fuel the populist subsidies. It's okay that the government has been providing tied funds. Tied funds are, able to ensure that if the governments are performing better in certain areas, then those funds would be given to the respective state governments. But what about the untied funds? So untied funds are not linked with any government schemes and their performance and implementation. So in this context, there is a need for the accountability mechanisms for these untied funds as well, so that the state governments would focus more and more on the human capital development instead of spending that particular amount of money on unproductive sectors. So apart from that, there are some additional details have been given with respect to the Finance Commission. The first Finance Commission chairman was K.C. Niyogi, and the time period was 1952 to 1957. Second Finance Commission was chaired by K. Santanam from 57 to 62, and the 15th Finance Commission N.K. Singh, and 16th Finance Commission Arvind Pangaria. And in fact, this is the constitutionally mandated body, because Indian Constitution Article 280 mandated that the president must constitute a finance commission once in every 5 years, right? So it is constituted by the president. So if you look at the members of the finance commission, so a chairman and 4 members, including a high court judge, and they will be appointed by the president. And in fact, the authority to decide the qualification of the members and the chairman is the parliament. So parliament is the authority to decide the qualifications of members and chairman. And in fact, if we talk about the tenure, so this tenure of the finance commission members will be decided by the president, and they are also eligible for the reappointment as well. However, so they make recommendations in certain areas, for example, distribution of net tax proceeds between the center and states, principles for granting aid to states by the center, and evaluates the rise in consolidated fund of states to affix the resources for panchayats and the municipalities. And these are the areas generally it actually looked into. And in fact, the Finance Commission also have all the powers of a civil code as per the Code of Civil Procedure 1908. So these are some important details that you should remember with respect to the Finance Commission. And going ahead, we need to talk about the importance of equity and decentralization implications on the respective states when the center has been devolving a certain sum of funds to the respective state governments. It is very, very important. There is a need for equity, and there is a need to reduce the disparities and inequalities across different states. So it is the fact that in India, we have been experiencing the interstate disparities, right? So we have been experiencing the interstate disparities. For example, a state like Karnataka is considered as much more developed and prosperous compared to a state like a Chhattisgarh or a Bihar. So in this context, there are a large variations in the public spending. And this large variations in the public spending and large scale interstate disparities are also questioning whether the untied funds that the center has been providing to the respective states will promote the horizontal equity or not, because most of these untied funds are being used on the unproductive sectors by most of the state governments, and that is a key concern here. And apart from that, the local self-governance institutions, and when we look into the performance and progress of the local self-governance institutions, So their performance is also poor compared to the number of countries such as China and South Africa. So therefore, in this context, it is also very important that the state governments must devolve a certain sum of amount to the respective local self-governance institutions so that they can also perform well, and it would result in large-scale democratic decentralization and participation of people in the governance process as well, right? So however, states are reluctant to devolve more financing powers to the local self-governance institutions, and that is a major problem here. And in this context, the Finance Commission and the central government must look into the rebalancing framework of these transfers, because that could actually improve the service delivery standards at the level of state. And in fact, so majority funds should be tied with or paid with the performance linked incentives, and there should be accountability metrics also, so that whatever funding that the central government has been providing to the state governments under the recommendations of the Finance Commission, so those funds will be used in a productive sectors rather than using that money for the wasteful expenditure or announcing freebies or even announcing more and more subsidies, because they are not considered as the productive sectors, right? So in fact, if you could look into the 15th Finance Commission recommendations and their revenue sharing formulas, so this is what the 15th Finance Commission has recommended, right? So the total devolution would be based on demographic performance, income distance between number of states, and forest and ecology presence in these respective states, area and population, right? So these are the different metrics that the 15th Finance Commission has been used for devolution of funds and the finances. Now, the next very important topic is India's Arctic policy. Now we'll understand what exactly is India's Arctic policy and why there is a growing importance of Arctic in recent times all across the world, and what are the stakes and what are the interests of India with respect to the Arctic region, and what are the other important areas that India can actually work with other key pillars of the Arctic region. Now the context is that the strategic and military landscape of the Arctic region is transforming at a faster pace, right? So why the military and strategic landscape of Arctic region has been transforming at a much faster pace? So because of there is an increased geopolitical competition among all major powers, whether it is US, Russia, and even China for that matter as well. Now Arctic region is generally known as a fragile and pristine ecosystem, and Arctic region is also located in the northern pole. However, in recent times what has been happening is that because of the global warming and climate change, the Arctic region has been absorbing, or it has been heating up more than 2 to 3 times than the rest of the earth. So that has been resulting in increased melting of glaciers, and melting of glaciers are also giving way to the shipping route as well. So this is known as northern shipping route, right? So northern shipping route. So apart from northern shipping route, because this shipping route is very important, it substantially reduces the distance between Europe and Asia. So instead of using this Red Sea area, this northern sea route would substantially reduce the time that is actually required to ship goods from Europe to Asia, and also the number of kilometers as well. And Arctic region is known for rich mineral resources. Because of that reason also there is a growing importance of Arctic region. And now climate change actually opens up the northern sea route, right? So this is the globe and this is the northern pole, and this is where this Arctic region is actually located, right? So because of the climate change and melting of glaciers, it opens up a new maritime routes such as the northern sea route. And in fact there are number of countries which are coming to the Arctic region to fulfill their strategic and geopolitical interests, such as Russia, China, and US. And they are also started consolidating their presence, and overall this has raised concerns for India's limited strategic engagement, because India is not a member of Arctic Council. India is just an observer of the Arctic Council. And in recent times also India's total engagement with the Arctic region and the countries in the Arctic region is also not substantial. So therefore it actually raised concerns despite India is having its own Arctic policy of 2022. So in 2022, India has actually framed the Arctic policy, right? So the strategic shift in Arctic geopolitics. We'll try to understand the strategic shift in Arctic geopolitics. Now you can see here, this is the northern sea route. So once glaciers are melting at a faster pace because of the global warming and climate change, so it actually gives a way for the sea route, and this is the northern sea route or the shipping route, and it would connect the Europe with the rest of the Asia. So this is the existing route. The existing route is much more longer and it takes a lot of time, and it also cost a lot for number of countries. However, the new route would be this. So this is considered as a new route, and new route is much more shorter, and it is also a much more cost effective as well. And in recent times, the other thing is that Arctic region could also experiencing the geopolitical militarization as well, because the Arctic countries, mostly US, Russia, so all these countries, what they have been doing, they are reopening their existing military bases, and Russia has recently did this. They have recently reopened the military bases in the Arctic region. So therefore it actually shows that there is a growing geopolitical importance of the Arctic region. So they have understood the importance of Arctic region, and that's why they are opening the military bases, and they are even deploying the submarines, reinforcing the territorial claims. So therefore overall it has been signaling a move away from the cooperative frameworks that were earlier established between number of countries. And secondly, as I've already told you that the northern pole, particularly the Arctic region, is melting at a faster pace because of the global warming and climate change. And similarly, the Arctic region is heating up much more intensely compared to the rest of the planet Earth, and that has been resulting in melting ice. Melting ice has provided for the northern sea route, and this northern sea route is now navigable, and thereby potentially redirecting the global maritime shipping away from the traditional Indian sea route. So this traditional Indian sea route is costly. It also more and more time taking as well. And in fact, you could also see the great power contestation in the Arctic region, because China's coming to the Arctic region with its new polar Silk Road concept, and US increasing interest in the Arctic region, particularly it has been showing interest in the Greenland, have been underlining Arctic shift into a core zone of strategic rivalry between all these number of countries. And similarly, as I've already told you, Russia even opened a military base in Arctic region as well. So keeping these things in mind, so what should be India's current Arctic posture? So what should be India's exact Arctic posture in present times and also in future as well? So as I've already told you that in 2022, India framed its Arctic policy. However, the Arctic policy of India is having certain limitations, right? So India's policy emphasizes on climate science and sustainability, but India's Arctic Policy 2022 underplays the evolving geostrategic and geopolitical dynamics and also the security dimensions in the Arctic region. Now, when you are framing a policy, make sure that it is a comprehensive policy, and it could also address the future concerns that a country likely face in the Arctic region. But India's Arctic policy actually neglects the strategic dynamics and also the emerging security dimensions in the Arctic region that we have just understood. Now, Arctic region is important and significant not just because it is a potential shipping route in future, but it is important because melting glaciers, increasing sea levels and submergence of coastal areas, and Arctic region is also known for rich mineral resources that almost all countries are eyeing on exploring those rich mineral resources. And because of that particular reason, so India should also take into account these number of factors when it is framing such policies. And India already have certain initiatives such as Svalbard Research Station and observer status in Arctic Council. So India is not a full-time member of the Arctic Council. So India is just an observer state in the Arctic Council, right? So all these initiatives are rooted in the benign multilateral order. So this multilateral order now appears eroding. So there is no such multilateral order because countries have been looking into their geopolitical and geostrategic interests when it comes to their engagement with the Arctic region. And similarly, India also largely remains disengaged from the Arctic governance, and that is the main shortcoming or drawback, right? So when you understood that at Arctic region would serve your interests in the long term, and it is very important that you should continuously engage with the governance in the Arctic region and almost all countries in the Arctic region. But India largely disengaged from Arctic governance and also the geopolitical coalitions, and thereby that risks the marginalization in the new regulatory regimes in the Arctic region. So you can see this is what is called as the Arctic Circle. And what are the countries with which Arctic region shares its borders, or countries share their borders with the Arctic region? And this is very, very important for your prelims examination. So Russia, US, Canada, Denmark, which is, also Greenland, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, and Finland, right? So these are the countries which shares their boundaries with the Arctic region, which is also known as the Northern Pole. Now, what should be the recommendations for a recalibrated Arctic strategy for India? So it is important that there should be certain strategies and certain suggestions so that India could understand the shortcomings which are existing in its Arctic policy, which could understand the future geopolitical and geostrategic dynamics in the Arctic region, and would start engaging with other countries in the Arctic region to serve its own interests. Now, in this context, it is very, very important that we need to strengthen institutionally. For that, we should establish a dedicated Arctic desks in Ministry of External Affairs and also MOD, Ministry of Defense. And similarly, enable a strategic interagency consultations with think tanks and also other important collaborations with all relevant stakeholders who have stakes in this Arctic region. And there are certain countries which are the democracies in the Arctic Council, in the Arctic region, and India is also the largest democracy, and that's where the interests could converge. So therefore, India should collaborate with the Arctic democracies for the sustainable development of the Arctic region, and also India continues to serve the interests, its interests, right? So collaborate on with Arctic democracies on polar logistics, satellite monitoring, maritime domain awareness without escalating the tensions. This is the other area that India could actually work in a much more proactive manner. And governance participation is also another very, very important area. So governance participation, essentially proactively engaging with the Arctic governance platforms concerning shipping norms, digital infrastructure, and even the blue economy rules as well, right? So why Arctic region is important? So if we specifically talk about the Arctic region, so 13% of world's undiscovered oil reserves. So this is home to 13% of world's undiscovered oil reserves, and it is also home to 30% of undiscovered gas deposits. And similarly, 13 million square kilometers of mostly ice-bound seas, right? So all these different factors have been making Arctic region a very, very important region for all different countries. Additionally, the northern shipping route, and that is emerging, and that could significantly reduce the cost of shipping and also reduce the delays. And you could see here the Arctic Council. There are 8 member countries in the Arctic Council: US, Canada, Russia, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Finland. So these are the 8 member countries which are part of the Arctic Council. However, there are observer states also, and India is a one such observer state along with China, Italy, Japan, Republic of Korea and Singapore. Right? So these are the member countries and observer countries. So apart from that, if you want more details about the Arctic region, so you could actually go through this. And in fact, the Arctic region is also known as the global commons. So I hope you knew what exactly is global commons, because I have explained this several times. Global commons is not the property of any particular country or any particular community. Rather, every country or every individual have rights over the global commons. So this is not the property of any country or any community, but all the countries across the world have the rights over that particular region, and this is what is called as global commons. So high seas or international waters are known as global commons. Space are global commons. Arctic and Antarctic regions are also known as the global commons. Right? So this is what this is exactly about the India's Arctic policy, its shortcomings, and what are the ways that India could actually engage with the countries in the Arctic region, and how India can actually make changes in its Arctic policy. So the next important topic is the second green revolution, or we'll also discuss about the first green revolution. And it is important because recently the Indian Council of Agriculture Research has released the genetically edited, or genome editing has been done for certain seeds, and this genome editing of the rice varieties would result in a higher yield and certain characteristics as well, and this is going to impact India's larger food security dynamics. So therefore, we'll try to understand in a very detailed manner the first green revolution, second green revolution, what is this news exactly about, and what is genome editing, what are the regulations, all these things we'll try to understand. So recently, the Indian Council of Agriculture Research, so it has developed world's first genome edited rice varieties. So this is very important and significant that you should remember, because the Indian Council of Agriculture Research has developed world's first genome edited rice varieties, and the genome edited rice varieties actually have the certain characteristics, such as they would give higher yield, and the productivity would increase, and they are also drought resistant and salinity tolerant in the backdrop of climate change, in the backdrop of different weather phenomena. It is very important, in order to ensure the food security, we need to produce the varieties which are drought resistant and salinity tolerant as well. And in fact, these new varieties which are developed by Indian Council of Agriculture Research would have increased nitrogen use efficiency, thereby making these varieties climate resilient and also the water conserving as well. In fact, India is a country which has been extracting the largest amount of the underground water resources in the world, and in fact, Indian agriculture alone consuming more than 85% of India's total groundwater. So in this backdrop also, it is very important that we need to transform Indian agriculture into more and more a water efficient sector to ensure water security for our populations, or sustainable management of existing water resources. And if we talk about the details that I have, as I've already told you, that the Indian Council of Agriculture Research has developed world's first genome edited rice varieties. So these two are rice varieties. One is DRR Dun 100, which is also known as Kamala, and Pusa DST Rice 1. So these are the two rice varieties that the Indian Council of Agriculture Research has developed, and these two varieties of rice are having all these important characteristics, and all these important characteristics among these rice varieties would amounts to the second green revolution in India. And we all knew that how substantially the productivity has been increased because of the first green revolution. And in fact, it is also expected that because of such varieties, if introduced on a large scale in different parts of India, that would result in second green revolution in India. So however, in this genome edited rice varieties, so there will be no foreign DNA introduced. Rather, a certain changes in the existing DNA of rice varieties is being made. No foreign DNA has been introduced. So if any foreign DNA is introduced, so that is what is called as the genetically modified plant species. Right? So you have to understand the difference between genetically modified plant species and genome edited plant species. So in genome edited plant species, what happens is that a genome within the plant is modified. Right? So genome within the plant is edited or modified. However, the genetically modified organisms means that the foreign DNA will be introduced into the plant species to change its characteristics and bring in the more desirable characteristics among the plant species. Right? So what is the difference between the genome editing and the genetically modified crops? So we'll try to understand the difference between genome editing and the genetically modified crops. So genome editing in plants, it actually refers to making a precise and targeted changes into the plant's DNA. So imagine that there is a plant here, and in this particular plant there will be no introduction of a foreign DNA from any plant or animal. Rather, the DNA within the plant would be modified, and that is what is called as the genome editing. Right? So it is genome editing, making much more precise targeted changes to a plant's DNA without introducing foreign genetic material. However, it also uses certain technologies like CRISPR-Cas9. Right? So it uses certain technologies such as CRISPR-Cas9, and in fact CRISPR-Cas9 is a genome editing technology, and we already knew about this CRISPR-Cas9 genome editing technology, and this will help edit specific DNA sequences within plants' existing genome. Right? So this is how a genome editing is actually being done. Now in genome editing process, what happens is that the genetic structure of a particular plant would be changed through either deleting, inserting, or modifying the DNA at a precise locations. But on the other hand, the genetically modified crops actually involve inserting foreign genes or other different organisms into the plant's genome structure. And this is the basic difference between the genetically modified organisms and the genome editing. Through genome editing, these rice varieties have been introduced. And in fact, in essence, genome editing actually modifies the existing DNA alone, while GM crops introduce a new DNA. So they altogether introduce a new DNA. However, India has exempted the genetically engineered crops, or genetically modified crops which have the foreign DNA, genetically edited crops or genome editing crops, from the biosafety regulations under the Environment Protection Act of 1986. For example, if we wanted to introduce the genetically modified organisms or genetically modified plant species in India, it is very, very difficult because they are covered under the biosafety regulations of the Environment Protection Act 1986. But contrary to that, the genome edited plant species can be introduced on a commercial scale in India because they are exempted from the biosafety regulations under the Environment Protection Act of 1986. So this is the basic difference. And in fact, these regulations govern, so the biosafety regulations under the Environment Protection Act 1986 govern both field trials and also a release for the commercial cultivation in case of the GM crops as well. Right? So this is how the genome editing can actually takes place, and CRISPR-Cas9 can be effectively used to cut the DNA molecules at the desired places and also introduce the new DNA so that we could get the desired characteristics in either plant or animal species, and that is how gene editing is being done, right? So what are the practical benefits of the new genome edited rice varieties? Right, so they have certain benefits, and because of that reason we have been introducing those new varieties. Now we'll understand what are those benefits that we have with these new genome edited rice varieties. So firstly, cultivating DRR Dun 100 Kamala and Pusa DST Rice 1 over a 5 million hectares of land. So this will substantially increase the paddy production by around 4.5 million tons, and thereby it will address India's food security needs. Apart from addressing the food security needs, so it will also become remunerative for the farmers. So that means farmers' income can also be improved, and India can be considered as a key export of food grains to the rest of the world. So thereby it will ensure the food security for not just India but also the global food security concerns were also addressed by such interventions in the Indian agriculture. And in fact, this Kamala variety of rice is having a shorter maturity period. So shorter maturity period for any crop actually means it requires a less number of irrigation, and it requires a less number of application of pesticides, herbicides, or even for that matter fertilizers also. Thereby it would substantially reduces the input costs as well. And in fact, such short-term varieties also require a few irrigation savings of 7,500 cubic meters of irrigation water, and this will ensure that the existing water resources are used in a much more sustainable manner, and it will also help us escape ourselves from the water stress or water scarcity that we are positioned to face. And apart from that, use of safe and award-winning technology, developing CRISPR-Cas9. So that is a genome editing technology awarded the 2020 Nobel Prize in Chemistry. So this CRISPR-Cas9 technology has got Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2020, and this is a genome editing technology, and using this genome editing can be done in a much more efficient and effective manner. And this CRISPR-Cas9 technology actually follows site-directed nuclease 1 and site-directed nuclease 2 methods, and they are actually considered as natural mutations that are taking place within the genetic structure, genetic material of an organism, rather than considered as an artificial mutations. However, with respect to these varieties, there are certain the intellectual property rights concerns, but the Indian Council of Agriculture Research has assured that they are being looked into and will be resolved in a due course of time as well. Right, so these are the advantages and practical benefits of these two new rice varieties which are introduced by the Indian Council of Agriculture Research with a certain characteristics. However, we knew that India was experienced green revolution in 1960s. And this green revolution substantially increased the food grain production in India, and it also helped build buffer stocks for India, and those buffer stocks distributed to the public distribution system, and they addressed issues like poverty and hunger across India. Now there are certain arguments against the green revolution and also in favor of green revolution. So what are the arguments in favor of green revolution? Green revolution, without a doubt, it substantially increased the production of food grains, and thereby ensuring food security for the large number of India's population. And similarly, green revolution helped increase the area under cultivation of food crops, and farmers are also started getting the fair and remunerative prices as well. And in fact, a green revolution is also considered as a practice which ensures economic and social balance, and it increased the standard of living of the people, and it also started creating more employment, and it also provided benefits to the certain sections in different parts of the country. So however, there are certain arguments which are against the green revolution. Green revolution was mostly introduced in Punjab, Haryana and Western UP. It was not extended throughout the India, so thereby it has benefited the farmers in those regions alone. Secondly, green revolution has benefited the rich farmers with a huge tracts of land instead of small and marginal farmers. And in India, 83% of the farmers are small and marginal farmers. So therefore, it is being said that the green revolution has not benefited the small and marginal farmers. It has only benefited the large farmers. And green revolution has resulted in unemployment. So unemployment, because green revolution has also emphasized on the large scale mechanization, and this large scale mechanization has resulted in the unemployment and the rural poverty as well. And it has polluted the drinking water resources, because the fertilizer, pesticides have been extensively used during the green revolution. So thereby it has started polluting the existing precious resources, and it has also destroyed the soil and soil structure, and soil fertility is also declining, and increase in the economic inequality as well. So these are the certain arguments against green revolution and arguments in favor of green revolution. However, India is planning to bring the second green revolution, particularly the eastern part of India. So eastern part of India means eastern UP, Bihar, Jharkhand, Assam, Chhattisgarh, Odisha, West Bengal. So these are the areas that the government has been focusing on to bring second green revolution, because these are the areas with a good water resources, and these are also the areas where rice cultivated extensively. So therefore, it is important that these areas needs to be considered if we are planning to bring the second green revolution, right? So under bringing green revolution to Eastern India program, the government will provide financial assistance for the farmers, right? So therefore, it is about the second green revolution, and second green revolution is also very, very important, because we could introduce the high yielding seed varieties, and we could actually focus on the natural farming or organic farming, and we could also ensure that the natural resources are actually protected, and fair and remunerative prices are ensured for the farmers, and India can actually become the net exporter of these food grains, right? And creating a large scale employment opportunities, and alleviating the rural poverty, improving the living standards of the people in these rural areas. So all these different benefits can be accorded to the second green revolution if it is implemented in a successful way. So that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much. And if you have any doubts regarding this lecture, so you can write those doubts in the comment section, and we always try to address doubts. Thank you so much.